As we've said before, some founding fathers are remembered for fiery speeches, some for brilliant writing, and some for towering personalities. But what about James Monroe? He didn't fit any of those molds. He wasn't Jefferson with a pen, or Adams in a court with a courtroom voice, or Washington with a commanding presence. Monroe was different, and maybe something rarer. He was the one who lasted. At 18, Monroe dropped out of college, picked up a musket, and charged across Delaware with Washington. He got shot in the shoulder at Trenton and nearly bled to death in the snow. That scar stayed with him the rest of his life. Most young men would have taken that as a warning to keep their head down, but not Monroe. He kept showing up as a soldier, as a lawyer, as a diplomat, as cabinet secretary, and eventually the last founding father to sit in the White House. Monroe wasn't the flashiest, he wasn't the loudest, but he carried the revolution's fire further than almost anyone else. And into the new century, onto the world stage, and into what history would call the era of good feelings. Welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band,
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not one small step for man.
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
James Monroe was born in 1758 in Westmoreland County, Virginia, the same patch of soil that produced Washington, Madison, and the Lees. His family was modest but respected, with enough means to send him to the College of William and Mary. In 1776, but 1776 changed everything. Monroe was only 18 when independence was declared. He didn't just study liberty, he went out and fought for it. He joined the Continental Army, serving under Washington in those darkest, coldest months of the war. At the Battle of Trenton, Monroe led a small group of men in the assault. A musket ball tore through his shoulder and severed an artery, a wound that should have killed him. Only the quick action of an army surgeon saved his life. And for the rest of his days, Monroe carried that scarf as proof that he had bled for the Revolution. When the war ended, Monroe didn't fade back into farm life. Instead, he studied law under Thomas Jefferson, absorbing Jefferson's Republican ideas. The mentorship defined him. Monroe became Jefferson's loyal ally, often the practical muscle behind Jefferson's grand ideas. By the 1790s, Monroe was serving as a diplomat sent to France during the Revolution there. He sympathized with the French cause, which got him into hot water back home. But it also showed that he saw liberty as a fight that transcended borders. Later, he would play a key role in negotiating the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of the United States. Monroe's toughness came back to the surface during the War of 1812. As Madison's Secretary of State and briefly Secretary of War, he was one of the last men standing when the British invaded Washington. He was one of the last men standing when the British invaded Washington and burnt the Capitol. It was Monroe who scrambled to keep the government functional, who organized defenses with too few men and too few supplies, and who held things together long enough for the war to drag on into peace. While others panicked, Monroe kept his head. And in 1816, Monroe was elected president. His time in office became known as the era of good feelings, a rare stretch of unity after years of political division. The Federalist Party had collapsed, leaving Monroe as the head of a nation, at least on the surface, that seemed united. But under the calm were storms. The issue of slavery was boiling. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was a temporary bandage, balancing slave and freed states. But it revealed the fractures that would later tear the Union apart. Monroe managed the crisis, keeping the nation together for now, but he knew the problem hadn't gone away. Monroe's greatest legacy came in 1823. With European empires eyeing Latin America, Monroe laid down the law. The Western Hemisphere was off limits for further colonization. Europe, stay the hell out of the Americas. In return, the United States would avoid entangling itself in European wars. At the time, America wasn't strong enough to enforce this doctrine alone, but with the Britain's Navy quietly backing the principle, it worked. The Monroe Doctrine wasn't just policy. It was America planting its flag as a power on the global stage. Now, Monroe left office in 1825 with his popularity intact, but like many of the founders, he ended his life nearly penniless. Despite decades of service, he had to live with he had to go live with family in his final years. And on July 4th, in 1831, exactly 5 years after Jefferson and Adams died the same day, Monroe passed away. He became the third president to die on Independence Day, his life bookended by the Revolution's birth and its enduring legacy. He was the last founding father president, the last revolutionary to hold the reins of the Republic. And James Monroe, the soldier, survivor, diplomat, and president. The boy who nearly bled out in Trenton grew into a man who declared a hemisphere was off limits to empires. He wasn't a man of fiery speeches or lofty writings. He was steady, loyal, and scarred. And sometimes that's exactly what a young nation needed. His scar was a reminder of sacrifice. His presidency was a reminder of unity. And his doctrine was a reminder that America's destiny wasn't just survival, it was leadership. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Remember, history isn't boring. It's the story of ordinary people who carry the fire of revolution into the future. I will see you next time.